Hello, this is Adjunct Professor Moran, Macroeconomics. In our prior two sessions, we've discussed gross domestic product and unemployment, two of the three major macroeconomic variables. We're now going to discuss inflation. Inflation, which is also known as a change in the price level. Changes in the price level can be either inflation, an increase in the price level, or deflation, a decrease in the price level. Because of structural changes in the United States economy, we very rarely experience deflation anymore. So most people, instead of saying change in the price level, just refer to it as inflation. Inflation is an increase in the overall price level. It's an increase in the price of a market basket that is not related to a change in either quality or quantity. So in order to measure inflation, this is the survey I worked on when I was with the government, we'd send economists out to price everything that you buy in about the proportion you buy it. So we price very few cars and a lot of loaves of bread. Gasoline, electricity, cost of housing and rents. We measure clothing, and we measure it and weight it in about the proportion that people buy it. And we know this because we ask people to keep diaries. And then we send economists out, and on a routine basis, they go to the stores and update the prices. And so if one month a can of corn is $1 and the next month it's $1.05, that would be 5% increase. But not all goods move in the same way. So some months, some goods go up, some goods go down. So it's the price of an overall market basket that is counted. So goods can be going down while the overall rate of inflation is going up. But the government will try to hold the quality constant of the goods and the amount that's purchased. In this way, we're comparing apples and apples. So, for example, this would not be inflation. When you buy 1 gallon of gas at $2 per gallon, if you go back and buy 2 gallons of gas, and let's say this is 87 octane, you'd pay $4. Well, that's not inflation because you didn't hold the quantity constant. If you go back and buy 1 gallon of gas for $2.50 for 91 octane, then that's not inflation because you didn't hold quality constant. So the government, when we measure inflation, we try to hold quality and quantity constant. It's measured by our favorite government agency, the Bureau of Labor Statistics. That's the agency I worked on, and the measure is the Consumer Price Index. You'll hear this released on monthly on news stations. It's a big thing that affects wage rates and Social Security payments. It's an index, so they don't release it and say the cost of living is $50,000. They release it based on index points. Okay, so let's discuss index points, which we'll have a handout on this. All right, last month the rate of inflation in August was 0.4%. On an annualized basis, if you take that and multiply it by 12, that's 4.8%. That's a high rate of inflation. You would need $104.80 after a year to buy what used to cost $100. Now, if you look back from September 19th, so if you take August and project it forward, you get 4.8%. But if you go back to September 19th to August 20th and actually see what the rate of inflation was, it was 1.3%, in large part because of the decline in gas and oil prices. Now, this 0.4% increase is in large part due because of increases in used cars and trucks, gasoline, shelter, recreation, household furnishings, and food away from home, restaurants. So the government breaks it down into categories and can tell people who are interested in doing economic research exactly where the inflation is occurring. Now, in index, it's not released the cost of living is $50,000, now it's $51,000. Instead, they take a period in time that they want to measure from, and that period of time right now is 1983. So an index starts at 100 points. Today, the index is at 259.918. So the cost of living has more than doubled in the years from 1983 to 1920, August 20. So we haven't had a great deal of inflation that way in those years. Now, where did the 0.4 come from? Well, in August, let me point out that a percentage change, no matter what science or study you're undertaking, is a value now minus a value then divided by then. So this gives you something called the raw score. This would give you a change in index points. Dividing by where you started from gives you a percentage change. So where we are now is 259.918. And if we want to know what the inflation rate was from July to August, we would take the index in July of 259.101. and then we would divide that by 259,101 where we started, and that gives us a change in the rate of inflation of 0.4% for that month, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you annualize it again, you get a high rate of inflation, 104.8%. Now, if we want to know what it was in a year, we again take where we are of 259,918 and subtract out where we were a year ago, August 2019, 256,558, and we divide that by where we started, and we'll get a change of 1.3% annually. So if the current rate continues, if the July-August rate continues, we're going to have a higher rate of inflation annually than we had over the past, looking backwards over the past 12 months. Inflation is caused by two things, two broad categories. One cause of inflation is called demand pull. As the economy reaches full employment, as unemployment falls from, say, 7.9%, which it is, to 5%, to 4%, resources are going to get more scarce. And these resources may be able to ask for higher payments, wages, for example, to workers. And those cost increases to the businessman in the payment to the factors of resource, wages for laborers, for example, will be passed along to consumers in the form of higher prices, demand pull inflation. Another cause of inflation is when business costs go up. So, for example, an oil crisis. An oil crisis, for example, in 1973, business costs went up and were passed along to consumers in the form of higher prices. Let me go back and correct demand pull. Demand pull is as we approach full employment, our economy can't produce anymore, and so consumers may, in effect, be bidding the price of finished goods up, much like you would see at an auction. All right, because the economy can't produce more because we'd be at full employment. But here, where business costs go up, they'll be passed along to consumers in the form of higher prices, as I said before, but should have mentioned it for this. When you have increases in labor costs or increase in other factors of production, those costs of production will be passed along to consumers in the form of higher prices, and that's called cost-push inflation. The impact of inflation is not the same for everybody. Some people are hurt more, and some people will benefit from inflation. And we need to know the difference between nominal and real to do this. Nominal is in name only. So if this year you get paid $100, if last year you got paid $100 and this year you get paid $101, your nominal income went up. Real to an economist is anything that's been adjusted for inflation. So if inflation was 1%, although nominally you have $101 compared to last year, it now costs $101 to buy what used to cost $100. So in real terms, you're no better off. Your 1% raise is offset by the increase in the price of goods and services. This is important to know because not everybody's income changes at the same rate or at the same rate as the rate of inflation. In order to find out how you're really doing, you need to take your nominal change and subtract out the rate of inflation, the change in the price level, and you can see if you're better off or worse off. So, if your increase is 5% on an annualized basis, and we subtract out the rate of inflation, of 2%, then in real terms, your pay went up by 3%. But if your pay goes up by 1% perhaps, and the rate of inflation is 3%, then although you may have more money, you may have gone to $101, the cost of living is now $103. Something that used to cost $100 would now cost $103, and so you've lost $2 purchasing power in this example. And so it's very important at the end of the year when you get a raise to make sure that you compare your rate of increase to the rate of inflation to see how much really you're better off. Now, some people are harmed by inflation. People on fixed income. So if you receive a pension and it's set at a certain amount and inflation goes up, although in nominal terms you're no better or worse off because your check is staying the same, because of inflation, the purchasing power of that set amount is being eroded. It takes more money to buy a mix of goods and services. Landlords, for example, when you sign a lease, can only collect the amount on the lease. But if inflation, like heating oil, is going up for them, then that payment that you're making doesn't go as far, and they're hurt by unanticipated inflation. Workers on a fixed income. So if you work for a wage rate and your salary doesn't change over time, well, inflation will go up over time. And so although in nominal terms you're collecting the same amount, in real terms that money can't buy as much as it used to. Savers are hurt by inflation because generally inflation will be higher than the rate of interest that the bank will pay you. And so although at the end of the year you may have more money, I believe the rate of payment interest in a bank now is about 0.25%. So if you put $100 in, they'll give you an extra quarter at the end of the year. That's how low interest rates are in banks right now. But the rate of inflation, as we just saw, is someplace between 1.3% and 4.8%. So you'd be $1.05 or $4.55 behind as a result of inflation. When creditors, people who borrow money, are also hurt by inflation. Think about it. When you save money, you're actually loaning the bank money. When someone loans someone money and there's inflation, you get money that can buy a lot, but are paid back with money that's been eroded by inflation. People who are unaffected or helped by inflation are the opposite. People on fixed income. So Social Security now receives an index at the end of the year for the rate of inflation. Workers who get COLAs, that's a cost of living allowance. So if you work for a union, for example, and they can create a contract that increases your pay for the rate of inflation, automatically every year you'll get an increase equal to the rate of inflation. And although nominally you'll have more money, you're really just keeping pace with inflation and your real income has not changed. Some people who are benefiting from inflation are some businesses can raise their prices faster than their costs go up. So in the O's, there was a time when oil went to $150 a barrel, and the price of a gallon of gas went to $4.50, and they were making terrific profits because they raised their prices at a faster rate than their costs were going up. Debtors can borrow. So the opposite of a lender is a debtor. And you borrow money and buy things now with money that has a great deal of purchasing power, and be paid back, the bank for example, with money that has been eroded by inflation. Let's do an example. So let's say this is the purchase. This is how much it takes to buy a collection of goods. And this is what you borrow. So these will be debtors who are benefiting from inflation. You borrow $100 from a bank and you can buy $100 worth of goods. Let's say the rate of inflation is 5%. At the end of the year, it would take $105 to what cost $100 at the beginning of the year. Now, let's say you borrow $100 and the interest rate the bank charges is 5%. You'll pay back the bank 5% or $5. But the bank, although nominally it's been paid more, in real terms can't buy anything more than it loaned out. And so debtors can benefit from inflation if the banks don't add an inflation premium in. This is similar if you're a bank. You borrow $100 and at the beginning of the period you can buy $100 worth of goods. But if inflation is 5%, it takes 5% at the end of the year. But you've only collected $5. So the borrower is being paid back with money that is inflated and doesn't buy as much. So the borrower will be helped and the creditor, the bank, will be hurt. Now, banks aren't going to let that happen, and so banks will work to anticipate inflation. And what they'll do is they'll add an inflation premium in to their loan. So the nominal interest rate will equal the anticipated rate of inflation plus the profit they want to collect. So if they think inflation is going to be 5% and they want to make a 3% profit, they'll charge you 8%. And this way, this will not happen to them. They won't be paid back with inflated dollars and with no gain in their purchasing power despite having charged interest. All right, so that concludes our discussion of inflation, the third major macroeconomic variable.